Rabbi, before we get started, I have a question.
Sure.
We've been doing the Torah reading for Shabbat. Is basically everything more or less the same for the Torah readings during the weekdays?
So good question. Let's we can take a quick diversion to address that question. So if you look in fact, it might be helpful to even, if you have both Siddurim, to put them side by side.
Page 65.
Yeah, so it'll be 65 and then 139 in the Siddur for Shabbat and festivals. And what you will see is that on the weekday, it begins immediately with Vayehi bin Soah. And on Shabbat, it begins with Ein Kamocha. Right, so Shabbat, when we have more time, and if you recall, we saw from the Mishnah that said like on a weekday, you have 3 Aliyot, and you're not allowed to add any additional ones, but on Shabbat, you can go ahead and keep adding to create more Aliyot. We're concerned about time. So it's a little more chick-chuck on a weekday. So we jump right in with opening the Ark. There's no introductory verses, and if you remember on Shabbat, those introductory verses are about proclaiming God's holiness and God's majesty, especially. So we jump right into the Vayehi bin Soah. The Brich Shmei with ending in Be'ana Rachetz, that's from the Zohar, that's only on Shabbat. And then if you go to 141, you'll see that on Shabbat and on festivals, we have the Shema Yisrael and the Echad Elokeinu lines, which are repeated by the congregation. And if you look in the weekday Siddur on 65, you'll see that we don't recite those. We go straight into the Gadlu and then have the procession. So so overall, the weekday version is much quicker, more straightforward. There's also a different, when we call it the first Aliyah, on Shabbat, we have kind of an extended V'ya'azor v'yagain, and there's a different version of that for weekdays. So that, and similarly at the end, there's a different psalm that we use to return the Torah to the Ark.
The chant is different too,
isn't
it?
Yeah. So the on Shabbat, as you would expect, it's grander, it's more royal sounding, whereas during weekday, you'll hear different things at different synagogues, but it's again much quicker, and it kind of fits in to to the nusach of the weekday service. Yeah.
You mean the actual Torah trope or the other chanting?
The other chanting.
No, like the melodies that accompany the prayers.
It seems really doldrum on the weekday. I mean, in my opinion, it just seems harder to feel inspired because the nusach isn't as, exciting or.
Yeah, I mean, so like on a weekday, it
just repeats that same.
Yeah, it's which this is Monday and Thursday morning. People got to get to work. They want to get done. Like we don't have time to
sing an aria.
Exactly. And Shabbat, we got all the time in the world. So
and make Shabbat special.
Got to make Shabbat special. Exactly. Okay, but when we get to the blessings for the Aliyah, then it's the same, wherever we happen to be. So now we're on page 142 in the Siddur for Shabbat. It'll be page 67 in the weekday Siddur. Okay, and if you recall, we had this teaching in the Mishnah. We saw this already. This is actually just a a snippet from this Mishnah, one sentence. So this is chapter 4, Mishnah number 1 from Tractate Megillah. And begins, Hapoteach v'achotem batorah, mevarech lefaneha u'la'achareha. So poteach is the one who opens. Chotem is the one who closes, literally the one who signs or seals. So the one who begins, the one who concludes in the Torah. Mevarech says a blessing, lefaneha u'la'achareha, before it and after it. Right, and so we discussed this earlier, that originally when the rabbis first imagined the Torah service, the first person who gets up there says a blessing before the first reading, and then the last person says a blessing after the last reading with nothing in between. So remember, Mishnah is compiled during the 2nd century of the Common Era in the land of Israel. But then we get to the Talmud, and the Talmud gives us an indication that the practice changed. So sometime in the course of we call the Amoraic period, at least in Babylonia, right? So, 3rd century to the 5th century, something changed. And so it says, v'ha'idana, which means nowadays, that all recite it before and afterwards, all meaning everybody who comes up for an Aliyah. All right, so now we've seen the change, right? So now we need a blessing for everyone. So why? So the Gemara gives us an explanation. Hainu tama de takinu rabanan gzera, right? So the reason is that the sages issued a gzera, a decree. Now, decree is, we've run into this word before. It's when there's some sort of need that doesn't seem to be dealt with directly by Torah law, but the rabbis recognize that there is some sort of, new social reality, and we need to create a new law in order to correct some sort of problem. So what is the problem? Mishum hanichnasin and mishum hayotzin, on account of those who enter and account on those who leave. All right. What are we talking about?
Are people more educated at this point in time than before when they excluded?
Actually, I would say less educated.
Really?
If anything. Either that or there's more people coming. And so there's it's not in the days of the Mishnah where it might be limited to a more kind of intellectual elite among the rabbis community. In Babylonia, that's expanding. So people are entering and people are leaving. Why would that necessitate additional blessings?
Well, if you come in while it's in progress, you get another blessing, at regular intervals. But it's a little bit trickier for people who leave, and why you'd have a blessing afterwards. So I guess they may be assuming that people are kind enough to enter or leave at the boundaries of Aliyot.
Right. Okay. So let's say somebody walks in the middle of the 3rd Aliyah, right? In the Mishnah's system, right? So that person never hears a blessing beforehand, right? They came too late. Let's say a person walks out after the 5th Aliyah. They never heard the concluding blessing, right? So the rabbis wanted to make sure that everybody heard both blessings. And the only way to ensure that happened was by saying that, okay, we're going to say a blessing before and after every single Aliyah.
Oh, is that the reason why we do it too?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the origin of the reason why we do it. Yeah, this is where it comes from. And what they're worried about is somebody getting the wrong impression about what the requirements are. So if I were to show up in the 3rd Aliyah and not hear the blessing beforehand, I might think that the only requirement is to say one blessing at the end. Or if I leave after the 5th Aliyah, I might mistakenly think that the only requirement is to say the blessing beforehand. And so to make sure that nobody develops this mistaken idea, they made this change and instituted a blessing before and after.
That's an interesting response to that problem, because you would think they could also make a rule that you're supposed to arrive in time to hear the whole thing.
Yeah, so what do the rabbis actually have control over?
I think they were being
So the
realistic.
rabbi says.
You've never been a pulpit rabbi, clearly.
So says the rabbi.
Yeah. 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 So
You mean you have to come at 9 a.m.?
yeah.
But I suppose a side effect of this is going to lead us into having separate people who say the blessings and who read.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's true. I think that's related to it. I mean, I guess you can see in this a kind of an expansion of the involvement of people in services, that now we're worried that people who maybe don't know this stuff very well, and remember they don't have a Siddur, they're going to walk in and all they've got is what they can observe. And so the rabbis are really concerned that we want to make sure we are setting the right example and not doing anything that is going to lead people to, to assume the wrong thing.
I'm wondering about the setting of all of this. Where did they do this? Was it in the Beit Midrash? Was it in outside?
Well, no, they had synagogues. Yeah, but the word in the Aramaic, it's Beit Kanishta, is the Beit Knesset.
Now, what about the whole Market Square idea?
Because people are coming in on Mondays and Thursdays I think they're coming in from whatever their farms, and then there's a synagogue in town, and so they go into the synagogue on those days to participate in services and hear the Torah being read.
Okay.
What do they do in the synagogue the rest of the time? What's the space, or is the space attached to some,
Oh, that's an interesting question. So, I mean, we saw that the original role of the synagogue, and this goes, originated during the Second Temple, is that it was literally a place of gathering and a place of public Torah reading. But the services we have, it didn't exist at that time. And so there is a gradual shift where the synagogue becomes a place of prayer. And then the kind of the studying component gets fused into the prayer component of it. There are discussions about, if you have a Beit Midrash, Beit Midrash is the academy, the place where you learn, or a Beit Knesset, which is a better place to have services in. And but we know that there were lots and lots of synagogues being built during the Amoraic period.
that's true.
So in a way, was this all to be more inclusive and get more people to participate?
Is it to be more inclusive? I don't know. Are the rabbis trying to change things and make it more popular, or has it already become popular and now the rabbis are trying to make it more maybe accessible to people who are probably, most of whom are probably illiterate and don't know what the rules are. So I think it does show an expansion of the influence of the rabbis. Joan, did you have a question?
Am I muted? No, my question was, because I've been hearing for years about how we, the people were illiterate. So then Richard Elliott Friedman comes out with this book, since they were literate.
I mean, there were some people who were literate, but yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it just gave me a different impression in that Exodus book.
Yeah, I mean, one of the recent scholar streams, forget, maybe it might have been Jeremy Kolinovsky, suggested that even many of the rabbis themselves may not have been literate, but that doesn't mean they weren't extremely smart. right? There wasn't widespread literacy, but that doesn't mean you couldn't memorize vast swaths of material and teachings, and there's a society that was able to transmit things orally much more effectively than we are.
That's interesting. To think of being an ordained rabbi at the same time is, well, I don't know what ordained rabbi would mean back then, but to be assigned that role, that's interesting. You wouldn't have to be literate.
Well, I mean, books and scrolls are expensive and few and far between. So, I certainly heard lots of numerous occasions that many priests in the Middle Ages were illiterate, right? Didn't themselves know Bible all that well.
But wouldn't the rabbis have to be able to read from the Torah scroll?
The ones who were reading from the Torah scroll had to be able to read from the Torah scroll. The rabbis discuss, if you know it by heart, can you do it by heart, or do you have to read it? They talk about that, right? And the answer is you have to read it, which is why it's called kriya, right? Kriya is reading, which would suggest that there are people who knew it by heart but couldn't read.
Well, there are a lot of musicians and composers who know music by heart, but they can't read it.
Yeah.
And if you look historically, it was common for people to have mass amounts of information memorized because there weren't necessarily, books weren't available even, through a lot of history.
Right.
Good point.
And think about what is writing, right? If we want to break it down, it's some sort of visual symbolic representation of language, right? Of communication. But we don't necessarily need the visual symbolic representation. We can just bypass that part.
It might be more heartfelt if it is the other way. I don't know. Yeah.
So, okay. So this is so now already by the time of the Gemara, we have a Torah reading that looks so, basically like what we have today. But we don't, the blessing does not appear in the Talmud. So this is what it is. So it starts, that's all right, let me go here. All right, so the reader comes up, not the reader, the person having the Aliyah comes up. Now, first of all, what does Aliyah mean?
To rise.
To go up.
All right, to go up, right? And so you will often hear people,
Come up,
probably
right.
myself
Way up.
included, who will make some sort of statement saying that the person who's being called up to the Torah literally goes up to the bima, and it's Aliyah, and it's like making Aliyah to Israel, et cetera, and all of that is completely wrong, right?
Interesting.
So the reason we call it Aliyah is because the language that the rabbis use, and in fact, we even saw this when we looked at the, I think we saw this term when we looked at the expression that said that everybody can be counted in the minyan of 7, in the number of 7, men, men, women, and children. The expression is ole le minyan. So, and what it means is are counted in the minyan, are counted in the number, right? Minyan means a number. So that's what an aliyah is. It's one of the 7 who are counted as part of the 7 aliyot on Shabbat. So a better translation would be, one who is counted. Now, that doesn't mean that when we give a drash about rising, going up, aliyahs, and really also means to go up, that there isn't tremendous meaning in there. But the origin of the term aliyah just means that it's one of the 7 that are counted towards the 7 aliyot on Shabbat. So what is that?
So I'm confused because sometimes at shul you hear, if you have an aliyah, it also means you have the Torah, the parsha reading. If you have an aliyah, it also means you have the blessing. And I hear that interchanged,
Okay.
and I'm wondering which
So
is more
we've got the
accurate.
yeah. So we've got the the ole, that would be, Aliyah is the thing that a person gets. The ole or the ola refers to the person themselves, right? So the ole or the ola, that's the person we are honoring with this particular reading. All right, we've got we can say a Baal Kore or a Baalat Kore, which means the reader. So the mechanics, so this is the bracha that the person would say. So we would call up that person to the bima. They would, the reader with the yad would point out the beginning of the reading.
Right.
Then the ole would kiss that spot, usually with a talit or something, and then roll the Torah scroll closed. The reader steps back, or at least the reader should step back to get out of the way. It should be very clear who the ole is, the ola, right? And one of the ways that they indicate that is by holding on to the wooden handles of the Torah, right? Called the atzei chayim, the tree of life, or the woods of life, right? So holding on to that, the person then recites the blessings for the Torah reading. So first blessing, Baruch Hu et Hashem hamavarach, right? What is that? Where's this from?
The prayer book.
We've had this already.
The Baruch Hu, isn't it like the Baruch Hu?
This is the Baruch Hu. This is from the beginning of Shacharit.
Right, yeah.
Right? This does not belong here. It was not written for here. Someone at some point thought it would be a good idea to put it here. Right? What does this have to do with Torah? Baruch Hu, it's a command. Bless the one who is blessed. Right? So this is the person having the Aliyah, the Ola, telling the congregation, bless the one who is blessed. And so what do? They comply. Baruch Adonai Mevorach Olam Vaed. Blessed is Adonai who is blessed forever and ever, right? Which is exactly what happens at the beginning of Shacharit. It's the same call and response. And then the Ole repeats the line, Baruch Adonai Mevorach Olam Vaed, right? This has absolutely nothing to do with Torah, right?
Yeah.
It means praise God. That's all it means. So this probably got imported here, but I guess our question is why? What does it do by by placing this here at the beginning of each Aliyah?
It's a good.
Well, maybe it's because that by reading the Torah, we are blessing God. We're thankful for the blessings, and it's just to get your attention to listen, I guess.
Okay, so get the congregation's attention. That's certainly true. Yeah, I think that's essentially it, that it involves the congregation in what is going on, right? The congregation has a role to play.
In the last part, when we were reading about, we talked about if someone comes in at the third Aliyah, well, they wouldn't have heard the Baruch Hu. So,
okay, interesting. It's an opportunity to add that. That's fine.
Well,
There's another, I'm not sure when it develops, but at the end of services, when somebody who was there during the first Baruch Hu is supposed to, right after the mourner's Kaddish, I believe, at the end of services, lead the Baruch Hu again.
oh,
And it's for everybody who was not there in time for services to be able to respond to Baruch Hu.
Is
We
that
used
the
to do
time-
that.
Yeah, we did that for a while, yeah. Maybe we bring it
You
back.
did that for a while.
Yeah.
But is that the time when people say the Baruch Hu if they didn't say it in the morning because it wasn't a minyan?
Yeah.
But I also have a question about this Olah person.
Yeah.
Isn't that related to the Olah as in sacrifice? Like, because these are substituted for the this part of the prayer service is a substitute for the sacrifices.
So it is the same word, Olah meaning a burnt offering, because it goes up.
And then
But
and then
actually, the
raise
Torah
it up.
service does not have the symbolic value of the sacrifices.
So it's the Amida that
It's
does.
the Amida that has that symbolic value.
So because it's interesting that we use the same word, and then especially to have an Aliyah then would mean to go up, and it would be related to the word related to elevation offering, wouldn't
Yeah.
it?
So one of the problems, the construction of ancient synagogues, the Torah reading table was actually often down. It was a couple of steps down. So the expression that the Mishnah often uses to describe the person leading services is yored lifnei hateva, the person who goes down before the ark.
Mhm.
So so Aliyah as a physical going up doesn't make sense in light of synagogue architecture from the ancient world, right? Okay, now let's look at the actual blessing for Torah. So you've heard this before. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher ba'achar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. All right, so what does this mean? So blessed are you, Adonai our God, ruler of the universe, asher bachar banu, who chose us, mikol ha'amim, from all of the nations, v'natan lanu et Torato, and gave to us his Torah. I'll just keep the pronoun gendered because that's what the Hebrew says for now. And then the final chatima, the closing blessing. Praise are you, Adonai, noten haTorah, who gives the Torah. All right. So this is the opening blessing. So what are the themes here?
Chosen people.
Chosenness
All right. So chosenness.
and giving the Torah.
Right. So we've got a sense of peopleness, like chosen people. We have Torah, and then it's reiterated with the final closing blessing.
The Chatima in the present tense.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a moment. But good eye, Max. This is the closing blessing. All right. Again, we say begin. We don't have the Baruch Hu at the call and response at the beginning. Presumably, the congregation paid attention during the reading. And how we concluded, Asher Natan Lanu Torat Emet, who gave to us a Torah of truth, V'chayei Olam Nata Betochenu, and life eternal he planted inside of us. Right?
That's it. Neshama.
Well, maybe. And then the same Chatima, blessed are you, Adonai, who gives the Torah. All right, so the first expression, who gave to us Torat Emet, Torah of truth.
Oops.
All right, so that's, we added this new element here of truth. And then planted in us life eternal. So what do we think that is?
I think it's the soul, that your soul lives on.
Soul lives on? All right.
The afterlife.
The afterlife. So this is about Olam Haba, right? The world to come. And so somehow, this idea of Torah and then our kind of embracing of Torah is tied into Olam Haba. All right.
The word nata, is that related to anything?
It means to plant. Like you would plant a seed.
All right.
Yeah. All right. Let's look at some verb grammar. Bachar, Natan, Natan, Nata. These are all past tense, right? So when we talk about, either the choosing of Israel or the giving of the Torah as let's say, as a historical event, right? So that evokes Sinai, right? Sinai is the moment of revelation when God kind of entered into the covenant with the Jewish people and gave us the Torah as a sign of the covenant. Right, but then, Max, as you noticed, here in the Chatima, it's not Natan, it's Notain. And Notain is present tense, right? So what does that mean?
He's giving us now.
It's being given now, right?
Yeah.
And so what we've done is we've taken the Torah reading that either is about to happen or that just happened, and we're saying this is like at Sinai, right? This is Sinai, right? This is the moment of revelation as well. It's not something that only happened in the past. It's something that happens every time we read Torah in public in this ritualized fashion. Revelation.
So it's a reenactment each time.
It's a reenactment, yeah.
Rabbi,
Yes.
God gave Moses the 10 Commandments, right? When he went up to Sinai.
Yeah.
When did God give us the Torah?
Yeah, the details are a little hazy. So we talk about the, well, first of all, if you read the text closely, it's not totally clear what exactly it was that God gave Moses up at Mount Sinai. While Moses is on Mount Sinai, he gets a whole bunch of laws from Parshat Mishpatim, like with a 50-something individual laws. He gets all of the instructions for building the tabernacle.
Oh, really?
He gets a written covenant inscribed into stone tablets, right? God speaks 10 utterances that are referred to as Aseret HaDvarim, the 10 statements. It's not 100% clear what the Torah is referring to when it talks about those 10 statements. So it really becomes the rabbis who understand this moment of revelation as being the revelation of all of Torah, both written Torah and spoken Torah. But the word Torah itself just means instruction. And nowhere in what we would call the 5 books of Moses, when the term Torah is used, does it actually mean the 5 books of Moses, right? It means God's instruction, right? It's later on. It's really the rabbis who expand the meaning of the term Torah to refer to the 5 books of Moses. And so the moment, but what they also say is they interpret that moment of revelation, and even if you want to say that it was the 10 commandments, which are what was written on those stone tablets, that in those words, they encompass all of Torah. And so a number of commentators have tried to demonstrate how all of the 613 commandments in the Torah fall into the 10 categories that appear in the 10 commandments.
Wow, complicated.
Isn't there also a phrase somewhere that hints at, and the rabbis elaborate, that means that Moses, while he was up there, like God wrote the tablets, but Moses wrote the scroll?
Well, we'll get there. Yeah, we're gonna get there. It's in the Torah service. Yeah.
Thank you for the grammatical
Oh.
lesson here.
Yeah.
And what I'm wondering, is it too far-fetched to conclude that we don't have ongoing revelation, like there's no more Torah coming or no more prophets coming? However, we are given the go-ahead to drash away and define whatever more truths in the Torah or interpretations that we want to find, and that part is the continuing word of God.
Oh yeah, I think that's right. I mean, we call it the Eitz Chaim, right? Tree of life, or that it's like a ma'ayan, an ever-flowing spring. We call it Torat Emet, Torah of truth. So the idea that all truth is contained within Torah, and it's up to us to figure it out, to dig it out. I mean, this is why the rabbis identify the oral Torah as being given to Moses along with the written Torah, right? That there's this extensive interpretive tradition that we have to uncover.
I'm just arguing with myself now, the position I just took. We do argue that something is from Sinai or that it's from the Rabbanim. So, and we make those distinctions in laws.
Yeah.
So it's like we do put second class status on some of our things. Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, I think I suppose that there's 2 ways of looking at it. There's the concept of Yeridat HaDorot, which is the decline of generations, that every generation that we are further away from Sinai is a generation that are kind of spiritual and intellectual capabilities are reduced, or that we, Torah is constantly being expanded, and to borrow a term from another feel that we're standing on the shoulders of giants, right? And so we're able to reach higher and higher in each subsequent generation. So both attitudes exist, including among traditional sources. Nowadays, I think in very frum circles, it'll probably, lean towards the former interpretation. I wouldn't see it that way though.
But then when they get stricter and stricter, it's almost as though they say that the current rabbis outpace the ancient rabbis.
I'm not sure that it's always so consistent, right?
They wouldn't admit that though.
Right.
Or they'd say they need to be stricter because we are less learned or less virtuous.
Right. Where the world is.
I mean, even in the Talmud itself, it says, well, this is the law, so you can't break this because this is from the Torah. Now, this law, we gave you ourselves, so there's less stringency to it.
Yeah,
So
well, but
even
of course, who are responsible for making these distinctions, right? It's the rabbis themselves. I mean, this is the kind of the, I don't know, the circular nature of the argument is that it's, a Torah law is more authoritative than a rabbinic law, but we, the rabbis, are the ones who are to determine whether something is a Torah law or a rabbinic law.
So much power.
It's a lot of
What's
power.
the difference? What's the difference between God and a rabbi? That's not a joke.
Yeah. So
do you mean a God? Did you mean a God or
no,
God?
Yeah,
God,
so I mean, this
period,
is
God.
So this
Because all
goes
this
back-
interpretation is happening by, sages and rabbis. So what do you believe after?
Yeah, so the sages have to claim their own authority. Whether it's going to be accepted among the people is another matter, but they ultimately have to claim their own authority. The Torah itself in chapter 19 of Exodus, this is the chapter before the 10 Commandments. This is when Moses is going back and forth between the bottom and the top of Mount Sinai as the intermediary between the people and God, trying to get the people ready and trying to, maybe even get God ready in some senses. And the text on several occasions kind of tells us what the purpose of all of this is, and it's to establish Moses's authority as God's prophet. Right? That because Moses is going to be the one who's going to communicate everything to the people. And so he needs to be seen by the people as being God's legitimate prophet. And so what the rabbis do, I think Ibn Ezra talks a lot about this in his commentary in chapter 19 of Exodus, is to say that it's not just about establishing Moses's authority, but Moses and all of his successors, i.e. the rabbis, right? So we need some sort of human who is going to be the expert at being able to, determine what God's will is in any given situation based on that expert's, mastery of Torah, and But of course, that person also needs to deal with reality and convince people to go along, with whatever that expert thinks is the right way. So Salman Schechter came up with a term called Catholic Israel, Catholic with a lowercase c, which is the idea that who has the authority to decide what Jewish law, Jewish practice is. We don't have a pope, right? We're not Catholic in that sense, right? So what he says is that it's, throughout the ages, it has been the kind of the leaders and scholars of any given generation, because, a person has to be knowledgeable in order to be able to issue, legal decisions, right? So someone who's not educated wouldn't be able to do that. So it's the knowledgeable leaders of the community, as in their role as leaders of the community, who were responsible for deciding what Judaism was in any given generation. And that is a process that can continued up at least until Solomon Schechter's day at the turn of the 20th century.
Do we believe that all those sages and rabbis were mensches, that their decisions were based out of a truth of integrity, or do we question that?
Traditionally, I don't think it's questioned. Yeah, I ask myself that the last few years. I've been asking myself that a lot. You know, we talk about these rabbis of the Talmud, and I ask myself, do I like this person?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know that I always do. You know.
There's an interesting circular argument that goes on, because even though we say, okay, there's laws from the Torah and then there's laws from the rabbis, but then they say, well, even the oral law comes from Sinai and is revelation from God, and part of the oral law is the fact you're supposed to follow your local rabbi or the rabbi of your day.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's a circular argument.
Yes, ultimately it is. I mean, where does the authority come from?
Yeah.
It's ultimately circular, and it's going to depend upon a community being willing to, you know, to follow its leaders. The Reconstructionist movement was founded and basically demoted the rabbi and said that this is going to be a democratic thing. So a true Reconstructionist congregation, there is a vote among the members of the community, as you know, to determine what halachic standards are for that community.
Oh boy, and everybody can have a different idea.
Yeah, that sounds like nothing would ever get done.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. All right, but let's continue.
We do digress.
All right. If you look on 142 and on 67, this is below the blessings for having an Aliyah. And this is, we're going to look at Birkat HaGomel, otherwise known as Bensching Gomel. Gomel means deliverance or being saved. So this is, first we're going to look at a passage from the Talmud. This is from Tractate Brachot 54b. And it says as follows: Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, Arba'a tzrichin l'hodot. So Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav, there are four who are required, who must give thanks. Yordei hayam, holchei midbarot, u'misha yachole v'nitrapeh, u'misha yachavush b'veit ha'asurim v'yatza. All right, so Yordei hayam, these are seafarers, those who go down to the sea. Holchei midbarot, those who travel through the wilderness. Misha yachole v'nitrapeh, somebody who is sick and then was healed. And finally, Misha yachavush b'veit ha'asurim v'yatza, somebody who was imprisoned in prison and then went free. Those four categories of people must give thanks, must recite a bracha of thanksgiving of some sort. Now, all of this, I didn't want to bring the whole verse, but this is based on Psalm 107, which describes kind of giving thanks and describes these, at least as it's drashed in the Talmud here, these four different categories of people. You know, and all four are people who were in a dangerous situation, you know, life-threatening situation, and then emerged from that. And so what Rav is saying is that, you know, inspired by this Psalm 107, these four people have a requirement to give a blessing of thanks. So then after kind of in giving a drash on, kind of lengthy drash on Psalm 107, it asks the question, Mai mevarech? Well, what does he bless? What's the bracha? Amar Rav Yehuda. Now notice Rav Yehuda is the one who initially brought this, right? So all Rav said was that these four people have to say a blessing of thanks. Rav Yehuda cites Rav and then tells us what the blessing is. Baruch Gomel Chasadim Tovim is what he says. So blessed, by which he means the entire bracha formula, who bestows acts of loving kindness, right? Gomel is like Gemilut Chasadim, to bestow an act of loving kindness. Right? So that's what Gomel is, right? To do some sort of redemptive type of thing. Now, Abaye Amar, V'tzarich le'odoye kame asara. And Abaye says, and he must give his thanks in front of 10, right? So we need a minion to do it. Dichtiv, as it is written, Viromamuhu b'kal am v'gomer. So now he's citing Psalm 107, the same psalm that we just, we didn't do it, but that the Gemara just got finished, explaining. Let them exalt him also in the congregation of the people. B'kal am. So the kahal of the am. So, and kahal this is what a minion is, right? So what is a minion? That's 10 people. So this thanks for these life-saving events have to be done in front of a minion. And then Mar Zutra Amar Utrain Minayu Rabbanan. Mar Zutra then adds, 2 of them have to be sages. How do we know? Shene Amar of Moshav Zkenim Yahalaluhu. Because, and then he quotes the end of that verse, and praise him in the assembly of elders. And so he's understanding Zekenim, elders, as being a reference to sages, to rabbis. All right.
So when we do benching Gomel in shul, what are some of the categories? Somebody's been ill and gotten
Okay, so
better.
that's a good question, right? So first of all, this is not talking about in services, right? This is about if you have this, you get through this life-threatening experience, you get a minion together, you bench Gomel, and you say this bracha in front of this minion of people, at least 2 of whom need to be sages.
Oh,
That's all it's saying. Yeah, Miriam.
I have a question about the word benching. Is that from Yiddish?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
what bench, how does that translate?
Mivarech, bless.
Bless. So it's the Yiddish word for bless?
Yeah, like a bencher.
Okay.
Isn't that something you read from when you sit on a bench?
Doesn't
A bencher is a book of blessings, right?
okay, but it doesn't compute with German. So this comes from somewhere else. Yiddish is comprised of a lot of languages,
Yeah.
but this word is not German.
Yes, the person would say a bench Gomel.
Okay.
I don't know the
Because
difference.
it's SCH, that indicates it must be Yiddish.
Yeah.
So Rabbi,
Yes.
I take it that since we do it now for people who have taken a trip to Israel or probably any other trip that involves air flight, especially over the ocean. So I'm guessing we're grouping people in with seafarers because.
Well, let's see. All right. This is Tosfot. Tosfot are the generation of Rashi's grandchildren. They wrote a commentary on the Talmud. And in addition to occasionally disagreeing with Rashi, they will often talk about contemporary practice. So we're talking 13th century France or 12th century France, right? Right. So here they say, V'nahagu ha'olam, right? The world is accustomed, right? The entire world. Levarech achar shekoreh b'Torah. The entire world is accustomed or has taken on the custom of blessing after a person reads from the Torah. Right. So now we can see that at least by the days of Tosfot, it had become widespread practice for people to say the bracha of Gomel after having an Aliyah. And then they add the davka b'chole shenafal lemita, and davka specifically or especially for a sick person who has become bedridden. Nafal lemita, who has fallen into bed, right? Aval, but chash barosho o b'me'av. So, but if a person has a headache or a stomach ache, ve'ino mutal lemita, lo, and is not bedridden, no. Right. So, what is Tosfot saying? I mean, they know obviously their medicine isn't so great, but a person needs to be really at death's door, right? They need to be facing death and have recovered, and then they go to shul and bench Gomel. So, and that's what he says davka, especially. So it seems in Tosfot, the primary reason that a person would be benching Gomel would have been recovery from a serious illness.
So if they're benching Gomel, they're not doing it during Shabbat, but they are reading Torah. So they grab 10 people and they go.
No.
No?
What he's saying is that during we've got multiple Torah services a week.
Oh, right, okay.
Monday,
just
Thursday,
not-
plus holidays like that. So the first public Torah reading after one's deliverance, one should be in shul. One would be, have a certain chazakah, a certain entitlement to having an Aliyah, so that that person can bench Gomel. But a person doesn't have to have an Aliyah to bench Gomel. It's just it had become the common practice, right? So how is this used today? So people will, sometimes after coming back from a trip to Israel or, or traveling or something like that, I was looking at Tosfot's comment here, and especially when the statistics say that flying on an airplane is safer than driving a car. Maybe air travel is not the best reason for saying Gomel. We've had people after a car accident coming and benching Gomel. That feels appropriate to me. Or someone had surgery in the hospital. That seems.
Has anyone ever come to you and you said, no, that's not good enough?
No.
Well, how about a an accident that didn't, I'm thinking of a near miss on a plane or something like that.
I think it's somewhat subjective. The original discussion in the Talmud is really, it's based on this drash from Psalms.
Yeah.
Right. So, and it's looking at, in the days of the Talmud, what are the most dangerous things a person can do? Well, it's traveling for sure. Right. Super dangerous. Right. Illness. Yeah. If you're confined to your bed, that's super dangerous. Getting out of prison. These are like the most dangerous things that you could possibly experience.
But like what Rita said, and Rita, I don't know if you remember when I talked about the near miss while I was driving to Austin.
Yes.
And I felt so like, oh my God, so blessed that
exactly. That's what I was thinking of things like that.
That feels appropriate to me.
Yeah. Well, that's my question. Yeah.
There's a certain subjective nature of this. If a person feels like they've, come through, like they're really like their life they could have died.
Right.
Yeah.
But what does Gomel mean?
It means kind of to deliver somebody.
Deliver. Okay.
Yeah. Romeo, did you?
Yeah. Is it that this is why the Sheberakh is immediately after?
No, we're going to get to the Sheberakh as well, but it's not connected to the Sheberakh.
Okay.
Right. All right. Let's look at the bracha itself. So the person, let's say the traditional way, person has an Aliyah. Right after they say the blessing after the Aliyah, they go right into Gomel, bless, which ends HaGomel l'chayavim tovot shegamalani kol tov. So Gomel is delivers, the one who delivers chayavim. So chayav means the guilty, right?
Oh.
The one who delivers the guilty for goodness, right? Shegamalani kol tov, who has delivered me all goodness, literally, right? So chayavim means somebody who I've got sins on my soul, right? I've done wrong things, which means, and there's this idea, a chiyuv is a debt, so that by sinning, by doing something improper, I incur a debt that is repaid with punishment, or if I do tshuva, I can kind of get that debt wiped away. But the idea is that we're all chayav, right? We all screw up. We're all in some sense unworthy. And so what we're saying is that despite my unworthiness, I've still been,
delivered.
I've been delivered, right? God has saved me. So it's a statement of humility and gratitude. And then, but then there's the congregational response. Now notice the Talmud didn't say anything about the mechanics of all this, but the congregation then responds, Misha, and if it's a male, be Gmalcha, if it's a female, Shigmalech, Kol Tov, Hu Yigmalcha Yigmalech, Kol Tov Selah. May the one who delivered you, Kol Tov, with all goodness, Hu Yigmalcha Kol Tov Selah. May that one continue to deliver you with all goodness, right? So you experience this deliverance now. In the future, should you need it, may God be there for you again.
Would a woman traditionally bench Gomel, or is this something that we're doing in modern days?
That's a good question.
Because it says here in the Siddur, including childbirth. So if the woman had a
Yeah,
difficult birth,
I'm looking in the Koran Siddur, and there is no version for a woman to recite it. I don't see why not, though.
Yeah, if a woman almost dies and then she pulls through,
Yeah.
is the husband or some other male going to do it for her?
Maybe.
Okay.
I was going to ask a question like regarding that. I don't usually take an Aliyah, but can I bench? Am I allowed to bench?
Yeah,
Gomel?
so-
I mean, not allowed, but how would I go about that?
Absolutely, right. And we've done this before at Sinai. Where,
I know, but I can't remember. all the
yeah,
time.
so, and you have, Rita, after your hip surgery.
Yeah, but did you say it for me?
No, you came up. You came up. You didn't have an Aliyah. You came up to the podium.
I did?
Yeah. You came up to the podium, and benched Gomel. And
Oh, after I fell, when I got back.
And
when I
you came back to school, yeah. And now, so what did we see? The original version is, it's not done during services at all. You just need 10 people because
Right.
of the interpretation of the verse, right? That it's done in Bikahal Am, right? In the congregation of the people, right? So, and then by Tosfot's day, it now had been incorporated into services, which kind of makes sense. Like if you've got to assemble a minyan together, it kind of makes sense that you do it at a time when you've already got a minyan. So that kind of makes sense. But you don't need to have a minyan to do it. I mean, you don't need to have a service to do it. Although ideally you should have a minyan to do it. And so all right, so the Sheberakh L'cholim, the prayer for the sick. At Sinai, our practice is, we have a practice of sharing gratitude with one another, and it's been a year, but the place where we do it is right after the 6th Aliyah, and that is the traditional place when Sheberakh L'cholim takes place. So first we kind of share gratitude with one another, and then we introduce the Sheberakh L'cholim. And so what I have tried to do is when someone is benching Gomel who did not have an Aliyah, I'll do it in the context of sharing gratitude, right? Which I think is that kind of makes sense as the place to do it. So we finish it then, and then we kind of move on to the Sheberakh L'cholim. So what is the Sheberakh L'cholim? So this is the version that's in Siddur Sim Shalom, that's in the plural. So may the one who bless our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, bless and heal. And then we list names of everybody who is sick. And the custom is to do a person's Hebrew name and that person's mother's Hebrew name. Now, if you don't know it, that's okay. Whatever name you have for that person is fine. And then it adds that kol hacholim, all of those who are ill, b'kila kedosha, in the holy congregation, and then underscores. That's supposed to be the name of the congregation, right? This is what's in Sim Shalom. So what I do is I say b'kila kedosha shelanu. So I don't say Sinai, I say in our holy congregation, right? Which I don't know, to me it feels more personal, right? And then it goes on, may the Holy Blessed One be filled with compassion for them to strengthen and heal them, and quickly send them complete healing from heaven, healing of soul and healing of body, amongst the other sick ones of Israel. Kind of an awkward translation, but that's what the Hebrew means. And then this expression, Shabbat hi milizok. Literally, Shabbat is from crying out. What it means is, though, we're not supposed to cry out on Shabbat. In other words, we're not supposed to ask for things from God on Shabbat. So we say, even though we're not supposed to ask you for anything, nevertheless, we're asking you for something. And may healing arrive close, now, swiftly, and soon. And let us say amen. Now, this version of the Sheberakh is a little different than the traditional, and not only in invoking the matriarchs as well. It also removes an element of the traditional Sheberakh, which is that a person is making a commitment to give tzedakah in the upcoming week as maybe as a way to earn merit to awaken God's mercy. So it's I'll just read from Koran. It says, so may he who blessed our fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Moses, and Aaron, David, and Solomon, bless and heal one who is ill in their name, on whose behalf so-and-so, there's another person, is making a contribution to charity. And then as a reward for this, may the Holy One, blessed be he, be filled with compassion, etc., etc., etc.
Well, maybe is that why we sometimes we send a mitzvah card? We do make.
Sure, absolutely. I think
that's the whole idea.
Donation. That's exactly where.
That's the whole idea, right?
We've just in the Simcha we've changed the language.
Zoom class. I'll come right now. You're leaving.
Well, back to, we don't ask for anything on Shabbat, and it makes sense that we don't ask for ourselves, which would be more narcissistic, but that we are spreading our love and concern for others. So it makes sense that we would ask God for healing for others. I don't know.
Or would we say it's an exception? It's a medical exception because you're allowed to break Shabbat for medical.
Yeah, I'm not sure this is direct. I'm not sure that this is direct administering of healing, the healing arts, but.
Hey, the Orthodox think so, right?
So what theologically, there's an expression that tzedakah matzil mimavet, right? That tzedakah saves a person from death, right? We say during Unatana Tokef, Uteshuva, Utefila, Tzedakah, Mavirin et Roa Gzera, right? Teshuva, Tefillah, and Tzedakah can turn aside the severity of the decree. So this idea of that tzedakah can somehow awaken God's mercy is it's well established in our prayers and our liturgy. We might have some different ways of looking at what that actually means from a theological perspective, but
we can't write a check on Shabbat.
No, so it's making, a person is making a commitment to donate tzedakah, right? And so I didn't include it here, but the Sheberakh, practice at Sinai is to give a Sheberakh after every Aliyah, which is, that's traditional. But what the tradition actually is that the person who's getting the Aliyah and getting the Sheberakh is making a commitment to give a donation to the shul.
Oh, I never knew that, Rabbi.
Yeah.
You would be very rich by now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. Anyways, that's the Sheberakh. Sheberakh just means may the one who blessed. Right. So we invoke the merit of our ancestors and say that this mitzvah that I've just engaged in, or this honor of being called to the Torah that I've just engaged in, may it bring blessing upon me.